The storm had been crawling across the plains all evening, swallowing the horizon inch by inch, dragging long trails of thunder behind it like chains being pulled through the sky. Caleb Foster had dealt with storms all his life, but something in this one felt different, like the wind carried whispers instead of gusts, and the lightning had intentions of its own. He drove his truck through the mud-slicked road leading to the old church at the edge of his property, his headlights cutting through sheets of rain that looked almost solid. He wouldn't have come at all if Father Marcus hadn't shown up at his ranch hours earlier. Wild-eyed and shaking, robes soaked as if he'd walked through a river instead of a storm. The priest had insisted something was inside the church, something evil, something not human. "It's the devil," Marcus had whispered, gripping Caleb's arm so hard his nails left marks. "He came for what belongs to him. I need your help." Then he fled before Caleb could ask anything more. Caleb wasn't the kind of man who scared easily, but the panic in the priest's voice stuck with him like a splinter. And so, despite knowing better, despite wanting to barricade himself in the ranch house until sunlight returned, he found himself driving toward the crooked silhouette of St. Bridget's Chapel. When he parked, the wind howled so loudly it sounded like a living thing. The church door slammed against its frame repeatedly, the rusted hinges screeching like trapped animals. Caleb stepped out into the downpour, boots sinking into wet earth. The rain hit him sideways, icy and relentless, but he pressed forward until he was under the wooden overhang of the church's entrance. He paused. Something felt wrong. Not in the air. Not in the storm. Inside. Like the silence behind the doorway was holding its breath. Caleb pushed the door open. It didn't just creak, it moaned long and low, the sound dragging across the empty chapel like a warning. The lantern that hung from the ceiling beam swung violently, throwing wild shapes across the pews. Its flame sputtered, flared, then steadied, illuminating a mess of overturned hymn books scattered across the floor. "Father Marcus?" Caleb called. His voice echoed, bouncing off stone walls and vanishing somewhere near the altar. No answer. He stepped inside. Each footstep echoed louder than the last, as if the church wanted everyone, everything to know he was there. Rainwater dripped through cracks in the roof, tapping the wooden floor in an irregular rhythm, like a heartbeat that couldn't decide if it was alive or dead. The air smelled of damp stone, extinguished candles, and something else, wood dust. Fresh and sharp, Caleb's eyes swept over the pews. Nothing, but when he looked toward the altar, he froze. Lightning flashed through the high windows, illuminating long, ragged scratches carved deep into the altar's surface. They curled and twisted like something with claws had raked across the wood in fury. Hours earlier, Father Marcus had spoken of them as marks of the devil. Caleb felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. The marks looked vicious, primitive, but something about them didn't sit right. He leaned closer, kneeling down until his face was inches from the grooves. He ran his fingertip lightly across one, feeling the fresh, texture-sharp edges, clean cuts. Claw marks didn't leave perfect depth. They certainly didn't stop abruptly or follow a symmetrical curve. These cuts did. Caleb's breath steadied into something colder than fear. He touched the wood dust gathered at the base of the altar. The tiny curls of shavings were pale, too pale. Would this old shouldn't produce dust that fresh? He spoke to no one in particular, maybe to convince himself, maybe to steady the trembling in his hands. This was done tonight. Another lightning flash lit the church and a silhouette passed between two pews. Caleb jerked upright, heart hammering. He scanned the darkness. Who's there? Nothing moved, but he knew he'd seen something. A shape. A figure. He swallowed hard and reached for the lantern, lifting it high as he slowly walked farther down the aisle. The storm outside roared again, shaking the building. The lantern flickered, shadows stretching and collapsing in frantic patterns across the walls. Caleb reached the altar and turned around. And there he was. Father Marcus stood halfway down the aisle, robes clinging to his thin frame, his face pale beneath the lantern's glow. Raindrops streamed from his hair, leaving trails down his cheeks like tears. But it was his eyes that froze Caleb in place, wide, unblinking, hollow in a way that didn't look like fear. More like exposure. You weren't supposed to come back. Marcus whispered. His voice sounded calm, too calm, like he'd rehearsed the words. Caleb tightened his grip on the lantern. You told me something was in here. Marcus blinked. Slowly, yes, but not what you think. Caleb pointed to the altar. You made those marks. The priest didn't move at first. The storm rattled the windows, the lantern swayed, and for a long moment the two men simply stared at each other in the trembling half-light. Then Marcus's right hand shifted, pulling something from inside his sleeve, a chisel, metal, sharp, its handle stained with fresh wood dust. Caleb's breath hitched. Why? Marcus stepped forward, the chisel glinting in the lantern light. Because fear listens, he whispered. Fear obeys. Fear fills the pews again. I needed them to return. I needed them to believe. Caleb took a step back, slow and cautious. So you blame the devil? Marcus's expression twisted into something indescribable, part sorrow, part desperation, part something darker. Because no one questions the devil, he said. No one argues with him. No one doubts him. He lifted the chisel slightly, but they doubt men, and men disappoint. The lantern's flame guttered, shrinking for a moment before flaring again. Shadows warped across Marcus's face, carving hollows under his cheekbones. Turning his eyes into dark pits, Caleb felt a chill slide down his spine. Not from the storm, not from the cold. From the realization that the priest standing before him wasn't possessed by anything other than his own unraveling mind. You scared the whole town, Caleb said quietly. People think there's something evil in here. Marcus's lips tightened. There is. Caleb felt the room contract, pulling him closer to the priest's unraveling truth. What did you do, Marcus? The priest laughed softly, brokenly. What I had to. What they made me do? What they forced me to become. He took another step. Caleb backed up until he felt the edge of the altar press into his back. The lantern trembled in his grasp. Marcus continued, voice shaking. They stopped coming. They stopped believing. I watched this place die. And I couldn't let God fade into silence. His hand jerked, tightening around the chisel's handle. So I gave them something to fear. Something to run from. Something to talk about again. Caleb's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Marcus! Put it down. But the priest shook his head slowly. It's too late. Caleb, once you open the door to fear, it doesn't shut. Lightning cracked through the sky, illuminating the priest's face, pale, wet, frantic. The sound shook the chapel, dust falling from the rafters like dry snow. The lantern flickered violently and went out. Darkness swallowed them. For a moment, all Caleb could hear was his own breathing. Then another sound surfaced, Marcus's unsteady inhale somewhere ahead of him. Caleb reached into his pocket for the matches he always carried. His fingers fumbled in the dark. The storm raged like a living thing outside. And just as he struck the match, Marcus was standing inches from him. Caleb stumbled back, the tiny flame illuminating the priest's wild eyes. Marcus's face was twisted, desperate, but not murderous lost. Completely lost, you see? Marcus whispered, voice breaking. Darkness listens too. It listens better than God ever did. The match burned down to Caleb's fingertips. He hissed and dropped it, plunging them again into the storm-thick dark. Something inside Marcus broke, then a sob, a sound buried under years of fear and expectation and failure. The chisel clattered to the floor. Caleb didn't move, couldn't move. The truth hit him with a clarity colder than the rain outside. There was no devil. No claws. No demon lurking in the church. Just a man who had tried to create monsters to hide his own ruin. And Caleb froze. Not because of fear, but because sometimes the most terrifying thing in the world is what a desperate man can convince himself to believe.